When passengers on British Airways Flight 5390 from Birmingham to Malaga were getting ready to board on June 10, 1990, they had no idea what kind of terrifying experience lay ahead of them. The events that followed became one of the most amazing survival stories in aviation history. An incorrectly placed windscreen panel caused the captain to abruptly be drawn out of the aircraft as the plane was flying above Didcot, Oxfordshire. Captain Timothy Lancaster had to hang precariously to the window frame for a tense 20 minutes. Nevertheless, the captain survived the ordeal against all chances. Join us as we investigate the cause of the explosive decompression that occurred on board the BAC One-Eleven 528 FL and the potential danger this presents to the lives of people on board, an uncommon event that sticks out as an especially amazing survival tale. GBJRT was the registration of the BAC One-Eleven Series 528 FL jet aircraft, which is also known as the County of South Glamorgan. On February 8, 1971, the aircraft took off for the first time, and on February 26, 1971, it was delivered to Bavaria Fluggesellschaft. Later, it was moved to British Caledonian in 1981, Hapag Lloyd Flug in 1979, Bavaria German Air in 1977, and ultimately British Airways in 1988. Timothy Lancaster, 42, was the captain and had 11,050 flying hours total, 1,075 of which were spent on the BAC One-Eleven. Alistair Aitchison, 39, was the co-pilot and had 7,500 flight hours total, 1,100 of which were spent on the BAC One-Eleven. The flight was rather well loaded, with 81 passengers and 4 cabin crew members on board. At 8:20 local time, 7:20 UTC, Aitchison piloted a regular takeoff. He then turned over control to Lancaster while the aircraft continued its ascent. The shoulder harnesses of both pilots were undone while Lancaster's lap belt came loose. The plane ascended to roughly 17,300 feet, 5,300 meters, over Didcot, Oxfordshire at 8:33, 7:33 UTC, and the cabin crew was getting ready to serve meals. A loud blast followed by rapid condensation in the cabin greeted flight attendant Nigel Ogden as he entered the cockpit. The rushing air from the decompression pulled Lancaster headfirst out of the flight deck, pushing him out of his seat. The left windscreen panel on his side of the flight deck had detached from the forward fuselage. His upper body was left outside the aircraft, in the bitter cold and with his legs trapped in the flight controls. The plane was falling quickly because the autopilot had disengaged. The passenger cabin's debris blew in, and the flight deck door blasted inward into the control console, jamming the throttle control and causing the aircraft to accelerate as it descended. The cockpit also blew out, releasing flight manuals and checklists. While the other 2 flight attendants steadied loose objects, comforted passengers and told them to brace themselves in case of an emergency landing, Ogden hurried to seize Lancaster's belt. Since there was not enough oxygen in the aircraft for everyone on board, Aitchison had to make a quick emergency descent to get the air pressure down to a safe level. After that, he turned the autopilot back on and sent out a distress call, but the wind noise prevented him from hearing the air traffic control's ATC answer. As a result, the emergency procedures were delayed. By now, Ogden was getting tired of trying to hang on to Lancaster, so flight attendant Simon Rogers and Chief Steward John Heward took over the responsibility. Lancaster had moved a few centimeters further outside by now, and his head was banging against the fuselage's side more than once. Aitchison instructed the others to keep on to him, even though the crew thought he was dead, and they were afraid that if they released him, he may hit the left wing, engine or horizontal stabilizer, and perhaps cause damage to them. As the flight attendants secured Captain Lancaster, First Officer Aitchison regained complete command of the aircraft and proceeded to initiate the emergency landing procedure. The aircraft was diverted to Southampton Airport by air traffic control. There were concerns that the heavily fueled BAC One-Eleven could find the runway to be too short. Aitchison had no choice but to keep flying the aircraft since it was unable to dump fuel to reduce weight. At 8:55 a.m. local time, the plane safely touched down in Southampton. 35 minutes elapsed between takeoff and emergency landing, during which time Captain Lancaster was stranded outside the cockpit for over 20 minutes. Colleagues were therefore undoubtedly concerned for the captain's security and chances of surviving. Nevertheless, he managed to make it through the incredible ordeal with only a few minor wounds. Lancaster sustained shock, bruises and fractures to his arms, hands and wrists in addition to frostbite from the time he was outside the aircraft. The only other person with serious injuries was steward Nigel Ogden, who had a dislocated shoulder and frostbite. As soon as investigators began looking into the concerning episode, they discovered an even more startling cause. This occurred after it was discovered that Chelsea, Oxfordshire, had several of the 90 bolts on the missing window. The settlement is around 5.5 miles, 9 kilometers away from Didcot, the location where the aeroplane was when it decompressed. After conducting a detailed analysis, investigators were able to determine that the bolts holding the windscreen in place were just a little bit too short and too wide. Engineers changed the panel during a standard repair process the night before the incident, at which point the windscreen was installed. Even though it seemed insignificant, this discrepancy meant that at altitude, they could not tolerate the change in air pressure between the cabin and the outside. The decompression was brought on by this discrepancy. The probe exposed misconduct at BA's Birmingham maintenance facility, where employees had sped up processes by taking shortcuts. Following the event, the crew of British Airways aircraft 5390 was highly decorated. For their bravery, flight attendants Susan Gibbons and Nigel Ogden, along with First Officer Aitchison, were given the Queen's Commendation for valuable service in the air. In addition, Aitchison was recognised for his achievements in 1992 with a Polaris Award, despite the terrifying and difficult circumstances he had to endure. After quitting BA, he flew for Jet 2, retiring in June 2015 at the age of 65. 5 months after the incident, Captain Lancaster was back in the air, flying for EasyJet until his retirement in 2008. The aircraft only stayed with British Airways for 3 more years before leaving in 1993 to join Romanian carrier Jaro International. Here, it spent the last 8 years of its career before retiring in 2001, following 30 years of service. No other flight in nearly 30 years has truly matched the amazing survival tale of flight BA 5390. It turns out that there are other flights where the windscreen has been lost in mid-air besides British Airways flight BA 5390. In fact, on May 14, 2018, an Airbus A319 operated by Sichuan Airlines experienced the same issue while flying on Flight 3U 8633 from Chongqing Jiangbei International CKG in China to Lhasa Gongar Airport LXA in Tibet. This time, the flight's first officer suffered a sprained wrist, minor injuries to his right eye, and facial abrasions, but managed to survive the incident. After the airline made an emergency landing in Chengdu, authorities discovered that a seal had been harmed by dampness. Aloha Air Flight 243 is a prime example of an explosive decompression story. The Boeing 737 aircraft suffered a catastrophic decompression during its routine inter-island trip inside Hawaii, resulting in the loss of its roof. Nevertheless, the aircraft managed to land amazingly, and none of the passengers suffered fatal injuries. But one flight attendant tragically lost her life after being sucked. Investigators discovered that British Airways policy had not been followed by the shift maintenance manager who had installed the wrong fasteners. They suggested requiring employees who wear prescription glasses to wear them while performing maintenance duties. They also made errors in the policies themselves, which for such a crucial assignment ought to have required independent testing or verification. Ultimately, they discovered that the Birmingham Airport's local administration was accountable for failing to keep a close eye on the shift maintenance manager's operating procedures. Airlines have continued to modify safety procedures and other policies throughout time to stop these kinds of incidents from happening, and when such a tragic mix of circumstances occurs, making sure that everyone in the aeroplane wears their seatbelts is essential to preventing fatalities. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more content on aviation safety. Your support helps us continue to bring you valuable insights and information. Thank you for watching. See you in the next videos.